Right now on Matter of Fact, the road to the White House heads south.
What does it take to win if you're a Democrat here?
You have to do well with African-American voters in South Carolina to be able to have any chance in this primary.
Facing a different demographic, is the Palmetto State the first real test for Democrats?
Would you both say that South Carolina should go first?
Plus, in the eye of the storm.
Basically, you don't know what to do because all of it's gone.
Can Charleston save itself from climate change? And growing up Gullah. Culture, customs, and cuisine.
We got our goat, we got our wild ducks.
How the descendants of slaves in South Carolina have preserved traditions from the past while serving a future generation its history.
I'm Soledad O'Brien. Welcome to Matter of Fact from South Carolina. We're in Greenville, which is the latest stop on our listening tour. The South Carolina primary is less than a week away, making it the first stop in the South on the primary election circuit. Since 1992, only one Democratic candidate has lost South Carolina, but still went on to win the national nomination. That was John Kerry back in 2004. And that's led some to argue that South Carolina carries more weight than the Iowa caucuses or the New Hampshire primary. South Carolina is also more diverse than both Iowa and New Hampshire. People of color make up a third of the population. College of Charleston political science professor H. Gibbs Knotts and Jordan Ragusa co-authored First in the South, Why South Carolina's Presidential Primary Matters. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
So it feels as if South Carolina is becoming more and more important in sort of the conversation around who is eventually going to be the president. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. And when we look at Republican contests, one of the things that's really notable about South Carolina is that it has a really good track record of picking who eventually becomes the nominee. On the Democratic side, of course, race is a critical issue in the modern Democratic Party. And South Carolina is the first state where candidates have to confront a large percentage of African Americans.
Are there any other issues that make South Carolina more important?
Certainly, yeah. Economics matters a little bit more in South Carolina, and South Carolina Democrats are a little more moderate, a little more conservative than national Democrats, and so it's a different type of person who's going to win in Iowa versus who's going to win in South Carolina.
Before I get that sort of broad strokes picture of the voter, talk to me about race, which you mentioned. I mean, when people look at Iowa and New Hampshire, they think, well, there's no black people here.
That's right.
Well, not very many.
You have to do well with African-American voters in South Carolina. You have to talk to issues that matter to African-American voters to be able to have any chance in this primary.
Outside of race, is there anything that makes South Carolina more representative compared to the nation than, say, Iowa and New Hampshire?
In Republican contests, there's actually a lot of items. So, we talk about veterans being important in Republican primaries. South Carolina has a balanced mix of veterans and non-veterans. We have a balanced mix of college-educated graduates and non-college graduates. There's a good mix of conservatives and non-conservatives, and you have a good mix on something like income. On the Democratic side, ideology is something that is not really representative in South Carolina, but it does balance out Iowa and New Hampshire, which in addition to being disproportionately white are disproportionately liberal.
So then would you both say that South Carolina should go first?
To have a state in the South, the largest region in the country, it's really important to have an early primary state. The Democrats also have Nevada.
First?
First overall, I think it makes sense to have it go first in the South, but certainly first overall, I don't want to jump in front of Iowa or New Hampshire. But, it is more diverse. It is more probably representative of the National Democratic Party than Iowa and New Hampshire.
Give me a sense of the South Carolina voter. Who are they?
African Americans make up about 60% of the Democratic primary electorate, but there's some other critical characteristics as well. Democratic primary voters tend to be less college educated and more religious. And they also tend to be more conservative compared to the typical Democrat.
So what are the issues that are most important to the South Carolina voter?
And one of the things that's happened in the past decade in South Carolina is that we've had a lot of influx in large manufacturing. Companies like Boeing have opened up a plant in the past decade. And so there has kind of been a manufacturing revival in South Carolina that hasn't happened in every state. So I think that's an important economic issue that a lot of South Carolinians are looking at. But it's not all economics. I mean, one of the things is that, we have a lot of veterans in South Carolina. And so what we see in these exit polls polls that something like World Affairs is more important to a lot of voters here than in some states. There's, of course, a concern about health care.
That very rarely makes the top 5, frankly.
Correct, right. And healthcare is a big concern. I mean, South Carolina is one of those states that decided not to expand Medicaid after the Affordable Care Act was passed. So it's kind of it's an all of the above situation, but economic matters end up being number one in the data we've looked at.
Yeah, and we've talked about a lot of the really strong economy in South Carolina in certain parts, but that is not the case statewide. There really are two South Carolinas, and that middle part of the state in rural areas, they are really struggling. Hospitals are closing, jobs are drying up, and so there is a concern about just making ends meet and surviving in many of these places. It's not all thriving areas like Greenville and Charleston and Columbia.
Who do you guys think will win it from the Democratic side?
I'd be very surprised if Biden doesn't win the South Carolina primary.
And if he does, let's say hypothetically, win the South Carolina primary, how does that tee him up, or whoever?
So one of the things, the reason South Carolina is so important is that a lot of southern states come really quickly after South Carolina. And so if you do well in South Carolina, it stands to reason you're going to do well in Georgia and Alabama, states with similar demographic and attitudinal profiles. And so, if Biden were to do well here, he's probably going to do well in these other states. And that could be, enough to get the momentum to be able to get the nomination.
Jordan and Gibbs, thanks so much, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Next on Matter of Fact, counting the cost of climate change.
We either had to sell the house or we had to elevate the house.
Homeowners face a tough decision, a $400,000 decision.
My house is going down 10, 20, 30%. Is it worth putting in the money to raise it?
Plus, capturing the past to protect a community's future. And how did a peach pit South Carolina against its neighbor, Georgia?
Welcome back to Matter of Fact from South Carolina. Weather and climate events cost the U.S. $45 billion in damages last year. And while South Carolina had a rather mild hurricane season, the state is still vulnerable. Charleston, the low-lying port city, is at risk for flooding even when there's no hurricane. Scientists say climate change is causing the sea level to rise in Charleston, which means more tidal flooding. Correspondent Jessica Gomez travels to Charleston to see how the city and those who live there are preparing for what could become Charleston's biggest safety and economic threat.
Charleston, South Carolina, a place developed around water, dependent on water, and now defending itself against water. Biology professor Philip Dustin.
What's happening here as a result of sea level rising, this bank is being eaten away.
There's actually dirt inside all of the walls because the foundation is sinking.
Anna Zimmerman, her home flooded in 2015. 2 years later, when Hurricane Irma hit, she knew it was time to leave. Like much of the Charleston area, it was built on filled marshland.
The house just fills with water, and it's dirty water, and then it starts to bury everything, and you just realize that you can't even save anything.
While the city is spending millions on projects like fortifying its seawalls and improving drainage systems, it's wrestling with how to handle the thousands of people moving to Charleston every year. Critics say it hasn't pumped the brakes fast enough on new development. Fill and build communities that make the flooding problem worse for those around them. Some, like Margaret Peary, who lives with her special needs son, are taking matters into their own hands. Her home, the first in Charleston's iconic historic district to be elevated 6 feet higher than it was before.
We either had to sell the house or we had to elevate the house. Well, who's going to buy the house? Who's going to buy a house that's under construction that had water in it?
This is all original house.
Original Heart of Pine structure, yeah.
Builder and architect Buzz Morris says it was a complicated and costly process, about $400,000. But now dozens more projects like it are underway, as flooded historic homes are losing value.
People are looking at that from a money standpoint. They're saying, well, my house is going down 10, 20, 30%. Is it worth putting in the money to raise it?
Money that many of those on Charleston's east side don't have, an area challenged by flooding and gentrification. Derek Milligan. His mom has lived here for 80 years, Her neighbors, not so lucky.
They're being forced out because they don't have flood insurance, and then they can't afford to get the renovations that's needed, so everybody's not as fortunate enough as some of the folks.
Many left to the mercy of nonprofits, like the Sustainability Institute, which helps weatherproof homes for those who can't afford it, like bedridden Tom Jefferson, Charleston's vulnerable population, most at risk.
There's so many homeowners that need help and don't have the means to be able to afford the types of upgrades that they would need in order to fortify their homes and protect them against these weather events.
Weather events, scientists say, that are here to stay.
If we stopped emitting CO2 today, it would take over 100 years for the atmosphere to cleanse itself and get back to pre-industrial levels. It's like trying to turn a great big ship. You know, how do you slow an aircraft carrier and make a U-turn?
Leaving a city racing against time, forced to adapt to the tides of change. In Charleston, South Carolina, for Matter of Fact, I'm Jessica Gomez.
When we come back, can South Carolina avoid an election night cliffhanger?
What some fear could be, quote, election-geddon.
Plus, a lesson in history from a community that's endured for more than 400 years.
Gullah, I would say, is the founding cultural significance of the Southeast.
Welcome back to Matter of Fact in South Carolina. For a small state, South Carolina has something of an outsized reputation, known for its peaches, its beaches, and its complicated history. One of the first major centers of the African slave trade in North America, on the other side of the state in Charlestown, today's Charleston, sits in the heart of the Carolina Low Country. More than 300 years later, the lives those enslaved people lived and the culture they brought with them on their forced journey to a new world still echoes in a community holding on to a pained but proud past. In the Low Country, our special contributor Joey Chen found the spirit and the strength of the Gullah people rising again.
Down here where the river meets the sea rises a rich history of a people who coaxed rice to grow amid the brackish waters and built a community that's endured for more than 400 years. They call themselves Gullah, a name that likely came with the enslaved people from West Africa, a name that, even today, keeps their descendants tied to this place.
What does land mean to the Gullah people?
Everything. Without land, you have, well, you don't have a place to live, and you certainly can't have food. And then there's a spiritual element to land, you know, to be able to see the forest and the trees and to watch things grow. Without land, there is no Gullah culture.
Artist Jonathan Green sees that culture in a vibrant, seemingly carefree, almost timeless setting.
Everything is about the community.
His images center on simple themes: home, harvest, and a place in history.
You can trace yourself back how far?
I can go back to probably 1830. The first name in my family is Parker, and the family that they were owned by was the Parker family.
The family name. I learned how important that is here when I lived in the Low Country in the early 1980s. Charlestonians and the Chinese, the saying goes, have a lot in common.
Yes, you're proud of the heritage, and you eat a lot of rice.
And sometimes we speak a language
that nobody understands. I'll get that hose from your Keith. You want? Yeah. You want to?
Chef B.J. Dennis is also on a mission to preserve Gullah life, but his art is on the grill.
We got our goat. We got our wild ducks.
Where Marvin at?
At the winter hog slaughter and cookout at Marvin Ross's family home outside of Ridgeville, the community follows recipes and traditions that have been passed down over generations.
Everything is all right with you today? Same to me.
What is the link to history of the community, to heritage?
It was important. I mean, the community shared with each other. If one person was growing a certain vegetable and somebody else had some type of meat or some different type of vegetable, you know, it was almost that trade and barter system. You know, you looked out for each other.
All right, what are we eating, BJ? Cracklins.
Mm-hmm.
The cracklins. The chickens, the oysters on the grill, all serve to reunite the community with its rich past as the chef described to us in the language of his Gullah people.
Well, out here today, we namming about the Nam Pom Biddle thing there. So Nam eat Biddle food. So you about to eat food. A lot of cracking we teeth and talking like this, yeah. We crack, we teeth, we talking to each other. It's almost a spiritual thing. Spiritual energy.
Ready for the next one? Ready for the next one.
You're doing things that were ancestral. Yeah, we're gonna stew them down with some peas. It's almost you getting, I get into like a zone, you know, and I also want to make sure the food tastes good. You hold on to as much as you can.
Even just a mouthful of rice.
A mouthful of rice, yep.
It's the same spirit that moves painter Jonathan Green in his art.
I mean, that's our sanctity. That's our glue, if you will. So when I look at painting from a spiritual perspective. I think what it means to be Gullah is, first, it's a culture, it's a language, it's a cuisine, it's music. Gullah, I would say, is the founding cultural significance of the Southeast.
A culture seeing rebirth and new growth in the marsh grass of the Carolina coast.
Well, you doing all right?
For matter of fact, I'm Joey Chen in the low country of South Carolina.
I ain't gonna watch you too hard this time.
Coming up, how many days does it really take to count absentee ballots? And settling an agricultural argument once and for all. Who's the real peach capital of the South?
Now to a weekly feature we like to call We're Paying Attention, even if you were too busy. There could soon be a change to the absentee ballot counting procedure to prevent what some fear could be, quote, election-geddon. Nobody's really calling it that. Anyway, instead of counting all the state's absentee ballots in one day, there's a push for a two-day count. If this passes, election officials would tabulate ballots the Monday before Election Day in November. The absentee ballot would get marked and sealed in envelopes until 9 a.m. on Election Day. Under current law, absentee ballots can't be tabulated until Election Day, which creates a nightmare and delays the final results. In 2018, a tight congressional race between Democrat Joe Cunningham and Republican Katie Arrington wasn't called until 2 a.m. Cunningham was declared the winner. The proposal now heads to the Senate floor. Last summer, state officials ended paperless voting, revealed a $51 million paper ballot voting system. Paper ballots will be used statewide for the primary.
When we return, why people from all over the world want a piece of this peach.
Finally, there's a giant peach, well, sort of, right here in South Carolina. It's called the Peachoid, a massive water tower that's shaped and painted to resemble a peach. The 135-foot tall tower is near the North Carolina border in the city of Gaffney, which has a population of about 13,000. The city's tourism director says people from all over the world, from countries like Canada and Germany and Japan, have visited to take pictures. Many recognize the tower from the Netflix show House of Cards. So you might ask yourself, well, why is the tower here instead of, say, Georgia, which is known as the Peach State? But South Carolina actually produces more peaches than Georgia and has for more than 35 years. All of this has created a sort of friendly rivalry, pitting, get it, pitting Georgia and South Carolina against each other. The Georgia Department of Agriculture tweeted, South Carolina says they harvest 3 times more peaches as Georgia, but we say ours are 3 times sweeter. South Carolina's Ag Department fired back with the age-old favorite Southern phrase, bless your heart. And that's it for this edition of Matter of Fact from Greenville, South Carolina. We'll see you next week back in Washington, D.C.